Standing at the altar in my grandmother's vintage lace dress, I thought the hardest part of my second wedding would be explaining to my daughter Penelope why Daddy couldn't walk me down the aisle from heaven. I was completely, utterly wrong. The moment my mother-in-law Francine stood up during our vows, her voice cutting through the sacred space of St. Augustine's church like a knife through silk, everything I thought I knew about betrayal changed forever. She'll ruin my son's life like she ruined her first husband's. Francine's accusation rang out just as Dexter was promising to love me in sickness and in health. 200 guests turned in their pews, a collective gasp rippling through the church like a wave. My bouquet of white roses and baby's breath started trembling in my hands, and I could feel every single eye boring into me, waiting for my response, waiting for me to crumble. But I wasn't the one who would deliver the killing blow that day. That honor belonged to my 8-year-old daughter, Penelope, who had been sitting in the front row with her grandfather, my father, Gordon. She stood up with a composure that no child should have to possess, her pink flower girl dress rustling as she walked toward the altar. In her small hands, she clutched an envelope that had been hidden in her little white purse, the one she'd insisted on carrying despite it not matching her outfit. "Father Miguel," Penelope said in her clearest voice, the one she used when presenting in front of her third-grade class. Grandma Francine forgot to mention what she did to Daddy's first marriage. The church fell so silent you could hear the candles flickering on the altar. Even the organist, Mrs. Henderson, who'd been softly playing background music, lifted her hands from the keys. Father Miguel, who had baptized Penelope as a baby and heard our family's confessions for years, looked at the envelope in my daughter's outstretched hand as if it might burn him. "My name is Avalon Morrison, and 3 years ago, I buried my first husband, Warren, after a car accident that the police said was caused by a sudden medical episode. I was 29 then, left alone with a 5-year-old daughter and a mountain of questions that would never be answered. I thought I'd never love again. Thought I'd spend the rest of my life preserving Warren's memory like a flower pressed between the pages of a book. Then I met Dexter at my daughter's school, where he was designing a new library wing, and everything changed. Dexter was nothing like the men who'd approached me after Warren's death, the ones who saw a young widow as either a charity case or an easy target. He understood grief because he'd lost his sister, Cordelia, 5 years before we met. He never pushed, never demanded I move faster than I was ready to move. He won over Penelope with patience and Lego sets, with bedtime stories that he'd create on the spot about brave princesses who saved kingdoms. He won over my father, Gordon, with his integrity and his genuine desire to honor Warren's memory rather than erase it. The only person he couldn't win over was his own mother, Francine, who had taken one look at me and decided I was the enemy. From our very first meeting, she'd made it clear that no woman would ever be good enough for her precious son. But there was something else in her eyes when she looked at me, something darker than typical mother-in-law jealousy. I should have paid attention to that look. I should have recognized it for what it was, recognition. Now, standing at that altar with my past and future colliding in the worst possible way, I watched my little girl hand over an envelope that apparently contained secrets I didn't even know existed. Dexter's face had gone pale beneath his summer tan, and when our eyes met across the small space between us, he looked away. That small gesture of shame or doubt broke my heart into pieces smaller than the rose petals Penelope had scattered down the aisle just 20 minutes earlier. "Penelope, sweetheart," I started, reaching for her, my voice barely above a whisper. The microphone attached to my dress picked up every word, broadcasting my maternal panic to everyone assembled. But my daughter, my brave, incredible daughter, shook her head and stood her ground. "No, Mommy. Daddy said you'd try to protect me, but today I need to protect you. He made me promise." And with those words, my wedding became something else entirely. A reckoning that had been 3 years in the making, orchestrated by a dead man who'd loved us enough to protect us, even from beyond the grave. 3 years after losing Warren in that accident, I never thought I'd find love again. The grief had been suffocating at first, like trying to breathe underwater, and some mornings I still woke up expecting to find him beside me, drinking his coffee black while reading architectural digests on his tablet. Meeting Dexter at Penelope's school felt like the universe had finally decided to stop punishing me for crimes I hadn't committed. It was a Thursday afternoon in September, and I was running late to pick up Penelope from her after-school art program. I rushed into the building, my teacher's bag slamming against my hip, when I collided with a man carrying rolled-up blueprints. Papers went flying everywhere, and we both dropped to our knees, apologizing profusely while scrambling to collect them. "These are incredible," I said, noticing the detailed library designs as I handed them back. "Is this for our school?" "Yeah, the new East Wing," he said, and when he smiled, something in my chest that had been frozen for 3 years cracked just a little. "I'm Dexter. I've been working with Principal Coleman on the expansion." "Avalon," I replied, and then because I couldn't help myself, "My daughter Penelope is going to lose her mind when she sees these reading nooks. She practically lives in books. That's how it started, with scattered papers." And talk of reading nooks. Dexter began showing up at school events, at first for professional reasons, then increasingly to see us. He'd find excuses to discuss the library plans with me, and Penelope would drag him to see her latest art projects. 6 months into our relationship, the three of us were having dinner at our favorite Italian restaurant when Penelope asked the question I'd been dreading. "Mommy, is Dexter going to be my new daddy?" I watched Dexter carefully as I answered. "Only if you want him to be, sweetheart. And only if that's something Dexter wants, too." Dexter reached across the table and took Penelope's small hand in his larger one. "I would be honored to be part of your family, Pen. But your daddy Warren will always be your first daddy, and will always honor his memory. Is that okay with you?" Penelope nodded solemnly, then brightened. "Can we still build the Millennium Falcon Lego set this weekend?" "Absolutely," Dexter laughed, and I fell a little more in love with him right there over plates of spaghetti carbonara. My father Gordon had been thrilled when I told him we were getting serious. We were sitting on his porch, watching Penelope and Dexter attempt to fly a kite in his backyard, both of them laughing as it repeatedly nosedived into the garden. "Avalon, honey, Warren would want you to be happy," my father said, his weathered hands wrapped around his coffee mug. "This Dexter fellow seems solid. More importantly, look how he is with Penelope. Even my sister Bridget, who'd been skeptical of every date I'd had since Warren's death, approved after meeting him at our 4th of July barbecue. She pulled me aside while Dexter was teaching Penelope how to properly flip burgers. "He looks at you the way Warren used to," she said, squeezing my hand, "like you hung the moon and stars just for him." The only shadow over our happiness was Francine. Our first meeting should have been my warning. Dexter had invited us to his apartment for Sunday lunch, wanting us to meet his mother. I'd spent hours preparing, choosing a conservative navy dress, coaching Penelope on her best manners, baking my grandmother's famous lemon bars that had won over even the toughest critics at school bake sales. Francine had opened the door before Dexter could, her eyes conducting a surgical examination from my carefully styled hair to my modest heels. "So you're the widow with the child," she'd said, emphasizing widow like it was a contagious disease she might catch if she stood too close. "Dexter's always been too generous for his own good." "Mom, please," Dexter had interjected, his jaw tight with embarrassment and frustration. But I'd smiled, determined to win her over with kindness. "I understand you're protective of your son, Mrs. Matthews. Any good mother would be. I'm the same way with Penelope." "Yes, well, we'll see about that," she'd replied, turning away before Penelope could offer her the flowers we'd brought. The wedding. Planning that followed became a battlefield disguised as a celebration. Every decision was met with Francine's cutting disapproval, each wrapped in false concern like poison in pretty wrapping paper. The morning of the wedding started like a dream and descended into a nightmare before I even walked down the aisle. Penelope twirled in her flower girl dress, the pink tulle catching the light streaming through the bridal suite windows, while Bridget carefully secured my grandmother's pearl hairpins into my updo. The room smelled like roses and hairspray, filled with the excited chatter of my bridesmaids and the soft classical music Tamsin had put on to calm everyone's nerves. "You look like a princess, Mommy," Penelope said, but then her face grew serious in that way children's faces do when they're thinking about something beyond their years. "Do you think Daddy Warren is watching?" "I know he is, baby. I said, kneeling carefully in my dress to look her in the eyes, "and I think he's happy we found Dexter." That's when Francine arrived at the bridal suite, uninvited and unannounced. She didn't knock, just used the key card Dexter had given her for emergencies. She stood in the doorway wearing a black dress that would have been more appropriate for a funeral, her lips pursed so tight they'd nearly disappeared. "We need to talk," she announced, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She looked at my sister and bridesmaids with dismissive contempt. "Alone!" "Francine, whatever this is, can't it wait until after the ceremony?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady while my stomach twisted into knots. "Everyone out," she commanded, as if she had any authority in my bridal suite. "Now." Bridget stepped forward, protective anger flashing in her eyes. "I don't think so." "This is my sister's wedding day, and you have no right to barge in here making demands." "It's okay, Bridge," I said, though it wasn't okay at all. "Take Penelope to get a juice box from the lobby. Give us 5 minutes." My sister looked like she wanted to argue, but she gathered Penelope and ushered everyone out, shooting Francine a look that could have melted steel. The moment the door closed, Francine pulled out her phone and shoved it toward my face. "Look at this," she said. The screen showed a photograph of a mangled silver Honda Accord wrapped around a concrete barrier. Warren's car. "This was your husband's vehicle after the accident. Single-car collision," they said. "Lost control on a clear day, perfect road conditions." My blood turned to ice water in my veins. I hadn't seen these photos. I'd identified Warren's body, made the funeral arrangements, handled everything, but I'd never looked at the accident photos. "Why are you showing me this?" "Why today?" "Because my son deserves to know what kind of woman he's marrying," Francine said, her voice dripping with venom. "Warren didn't just die, did he? The police reports mention you two were having problems. Financial. Stress from your shopping habits. Arguments the neighbors overheard. His life insurance policy that you collected was quite substantial, wasn't it? $500,000 for an architect. That's a lot of money for a teacher." "How dare you?" I whispered, my hands shaking so violently I had to clasp them together. "Warren had a seizure while driving. The autopsy proved it. He had temporal lobe epilepsy that we didn't know about until it was too late. How did you even get these photos, these reports?" "I have my sources," she said, waving away my question like it was irrelevant. "Private investigator, if you must know. Worth every penny to protect my son from a gold digger who might have murdered her first husband." "You're insane," I said, backing away from her. "Warren loved me. We were building a life together. Yes, we had financial stress, but it wasn't from shopping. He was paying for experimental treatments for his migraines, which turned out to be seizures. We didn't want to worry our families, so we handled it ourselves." "Save your stories for someone gullible enough to believe them," Francine sneered. "If you go through with this wedding, I'll make sure everyone knows what really happened to your first husband. Every guest sitting in those pews will wonder if you killed him. Every friend Dexter has will question whether they should let their children around you. I'll destroy your reputation at that precious school where you teach. How long do you think they'll keep a suspected murderer around impressionable children?" The door burst open, and Bridget rushed back in, having clearly been listening from the hallway. "That's enough! Avalon, we're calling the police. This is harassment, blackmail, and slander all rolled into one." "Go ahead," Francine said smoothly, tucking her phone back into her purse. "I'm just a concerned mother trying to protect her son." "Nothing illegal about that, but Avalon knows the truth, don't you? You know what really happened that day Warren died." Francine's threat hung in the air like poison gas as she left the bridal suite, her black dress making her look like death incarnate, walking through what should have been the happiest day of my life. Bridget immediately grabbed my shoulders, forcing me to look at her while Tamsin quickly ushered Penelope back out before she could see me shaking. "Should we postpone?" Bridget asked, gripping my hand so tight it almost hurt. "We can tell everyone you're sick." "Food poisoning. Anything. We don't have to do this today." "No," I said firmly, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "Warren wouldn't want me to let her win, and Dexter deserves the truth from me, not her twisted version. If I run now, it looks like I have something to hide." I stood up straighter, looking at myself in the full-length mirror. My grandmother's dress still fit perfectly, the vintage lace telling its own story of endurance through generations. "Help me fix my makeup. We have a wedding to get to." As I walked down the aisle 10 minutes later, my father Gordon's arm steady beneath mine, I could feel the weight of Francine's presence in the front row. She sat there like a spider, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, her face arranged in a mask of false pleasantness that didn't fool anyone who knew her. The 100-foot walk to the altar felt like crossing a minefield, each step bringing me closer to inevitable explosion. Dexter's smile wavered when he saw my face. Despite my touched-up makeup and determined expression, he knew something was wrong. We'd gotten too good at reading each other over the past 2 years for me to hide this level of distress. His eyes flicked to his mother, then back to me, and I saw the moment he understood that whatever was coming involved her. Father Miguel began the ceremony with his usual warmth, his voice filling the cathedral with words about love, commitment, and the sacred bond of marriage. "Dearest friends and family, we gather here today to witness the union of Avalon and Dexter, two souls who have found in each other not just love, but the courage to begin again after loss." The irony of his words wasn't lost on me. Courage to begin again. I was about to need every ounce of courage I'd ever possessed. We'd gotten through the opening prayers, the readings that Tamsin and Dexter's cousin performed beautifully, and Father Miguel had just begun the vow portion of the ceremony. Dexter took my hands, his thumbs rubbing gentle circles on my wrists, a gesture he always did when he sensed my anxiety. "Avalon," Dexter began, his voice strong and clear, "you brought light back into my life when I thought I'd live in darkness forever. You and Penelope showed me that family isn't just about blood. It's about choosing each other every single day. I promise to—" "Stop!" Francine's voice cracked like a whip through the cathedral. She stood up in the front row, her black dress making her look like she was already dressed for a funeral rather than a wedding. "I object! My son deserves to know the truth before he makes this terrible mistake." Gasps rippled through the congregation like dominoes falling. My father started to stand, his face red with indignation, but I touched his shoulder gently, keeping him seated. I'd expected this. I'd prepared for this moment from the second Francine left my bridal suite. "Mrs. Matthews," Father Miguel said sternly, his usual patience clearly being tested, "this is highly inappropriate. The objection portion of the ceremony is largely ceremonial, and this disruption— What's inappropriate is this woman marrying my son under false pretenses." Francine's voice rose to near hysteria. "She'll ruin your life like she ruined her first husband's. Warren Morrison didn't just die, he was driven to his death by a wife who spent him into debt, who made his life so miserable that he probably wished for death. The police reports show financial problems, marital discord, and a suspicious single-car accident that made her $500,000 richer." Dexter's hands tightened on mine, and when our eyes met, he looked away. That small gesture of doubt shattered something inside me. But before I could speak, before I could defend myself, a small, clear voice rang out from the front row. "Stop lying about my mommy!" Penelope stood up from her seat next to my father, and in her hands, she clutched a white envelope that she pulled from her small purse. She walked up the altar steps with the determination of someone 5 times her age, her flower girl dress rustling with each purposeful step. "Father Miguel," she said, looking up at the priest with those big brown eyes she'd inherited from Warren. "My daddy asked me to give this to you if Grandma Francine ever said mean things about Mommy. He said you'd know what to do." Father Miguel took the envelope from Penelope's small hands with the reverence typically reserved for holy relics. The entire church held its breath as he examined the front, where Warren's distinctive handwriting spelled out, "To be opened only in defense of Avalon Morrison." The priest looked at me, then at Dexter, who nodded slowly despite the confusion clouding his features. "This appears to be authentic," Father Miguel said, his voice carrying through the silent cathedral. "The letter is dated 2 weeks before Warren Morrison's death and has been notarized." He carefully opened the envelope and began to read aloud, "To whom it may concern, especially to my daughter Penelope and my beloved wife Avalon." If this letter is being read, it means Francine Matthews has finally acted on her threats. I, Warren Morrison, write this in sound mind and body, knowing that my time is limited due to a medical condition my doctors have recently discovered. I sank onto the altar steps, my legs unable to hold me any longer. Bridget rushed forward to support me, while Dexter remained frozen in place, his face cycling through shock, confusion, and growing horror. Father Miguel continued reading. 3 years ago, I was engaged to Francine's daughter, Cordelia Matthews. When she died in a boating accident at Lake Minnetonka, Francine blamed me for not saving her, though I nearly drowned trying to pull her from the water after her foot became entangled in the boat's propeller. The Coast Guard report, case number MN 2018-0847, confirms I was underwater for nearly 15 minutes attempting to free her. That's not possible, Francine shrieked, her carefully composed facade crumbling. Cordelia's fiancé was named William. You're lying. Mom, Dexter's voice cracked like a teenage boy's. You told me her fiancé was William Garrett. You said he moved to Europe after the accident. You said he never even tried to save her. Warren, William, I changed it to protect you, Francine cried, her hands clutching the pew in front of her. This man destroyed my daughter. He took her out on that boat. He got her killed, and now his widow has seduced you. Father Miguel raised his hand for silence and continued reading. The truth is that Francine has stalked and harassed me since Cordelia's death. She hired private investigators to follow me, called my employer repeatedly with false allegations that nearly cost me my architecture license, and even contacted my parents with threats. When I met Avalon, Francine's harassment escalated dramatically. The priest paused, looking directly at Francine before continuing. She attempted to have our daughter Penelope removed from our custody by filing false reports with Child Protective Services. She spread rumors at Avalon's school that she was an unfit mother. She vandalized our property and left threatening notes. Every incident has been documented with the police, case numbers listed in Attachment A, which my attorney holds. You knew who I was, Dexter said to his mother, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying in the silent church. You've known this entire time. Every dinner, every conversation where you pretended to just be meeting Avalon for the first time, you knew exactly who she was. I was protecting you. Francine's composure shattered completely. She killed them both. First Warren, and Warren killed Cordelia. They're murderers, both of them. Father Miguel's voice grew firmer as he continued. The financial difficulties Francine will undoubtedly mention were not from Avalon's spending, but from legal fees incurred fighting Francine's harassment. Every receipt, every legal document, every piece of evidence is stored in Safety Deposit Box 447 at First National Bank, Minnetonka Branch. My recent diagnosis of temporal lobe epilepsy, which causes severe seizures, has been determined by my neurologist, Dr. Patricia Helms, to be significantly worsened by sustained psychological stress. The priest turned the page, and his expression softened. Penelope, my brave girl, I'm sorry you have to be the messenger. Your mother doesn't know I'm writing this letter or that I'm giving it to you. She would try to protect everyone, even those who hurt us. But you're strong like her and smart like her too. Tell Dexter he's the man I prayed would find you both after I'm gone. He's good and kind, and he'll be the father you deserve. Penelope walked over to Dexter and tugged on his jacket. My daddy said you would take care of us. He said Grandma Francine was sick in her heart and needed help, but that you were different. He said you were brave enough to choose love over fear. Father Miguel cleared his throat and read the final paragraph. And Francine, if you're listening to this, know that Cordelia wrote me a letter the night before she died. She was planning to cut contact with you after our wedding. She said your obsessive control was suffocating her, that she couldn't breathe under the weight of your expectations. She died loving me, but she died trying to escape you. That letter is also with my attorney in her own handwriting. The truth you can't face isn't that I killed her, but that your suffocating love drove her away. Get help, Francine. Stop destroying lives in Cordelia's name. She would be horrified by what you've become. The silence that followed Father Miguel's reading lasted exactly 3 seconds before Francine lunged toward the altar, screaming, "Lies! All lies!" He fabricated everything. My father and 2 ushers had to physically restrain her while she thrashed like a wild animal, her carefully styled hair coming undone, her mask of sophistication finally shattered beyond repair. "Get her out of here," Dexter said quietly, his voice carrying an authority I'd never heard before. "Call the police. Father Miguel, please give them that letter as evidence." As Francine was escorted out, still screaming about conspiracies and lies, Dexter stood between his mother and me, tears streaming down his face. The man who designed buildings meant to last centuries looked completely broken, and for a moment, I thought I'd lost him to his family's poison. "Dexter," I said softly, reaching for his hand, "I understand if you need time to process all this. We don't have to continue today." He laughed, but it wasn't bitter, just exhausted. "Time? Avalon, she killed my sister with her obsession, destroyed your first husband with her harassment, and tried to destroy us. Time won't change any of that." He took both my hands, pulling me to my feet. "I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for every moment she made you suffer, every cruel word, every threat. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." "It's not your fault," I whispered, touching his face gently. "You couldn't have known. But I should have suspected something when she was so immediately hostile to you. I thought it was just typical mother-in-law territorialism." He turned to Penelope, who stood watching us with those wise beyond her years eyes. "Penelope, you're the bravest person I've ever met. Your daddy would be so proud of you." She threw her arms around his neck without hesitation. "Does this mean you still want to be my new daddy? Even though Grandma Francine is mean? If you'll still have me," he said, looking up at me through his tears. "Both of you." Father Miguel cleared his throat gently. "Perhaps we should take a brief recess to allow everyone to compose themselves." "No," I said firmly, surprising myself with my conviction. "We've waited long enough. Francine's held Warren's memory hostage for years, and she won't hold our future hostage for another minute. Father, if you're willing, I'd like to continue." Dexter stood, still holding Penelope's hand, and addressed our guests. "I know this isn't the wedding any of us expected. But maybe that's fitting, because Avalon and I aren't a typical couple. We've both lost people we loved, we've both been broken by tragedy, and today we learned that our paths crossed because of pain inflicted by someone who should have protected us. But we're choosing to build something beautiful from those broken pieces." My sister Bridget started clapping slowly, then Tamsin joined, and soon the entire church erupted in applause. Even Father Miguel was smiling as he resumed the ceremony, this time with Penelope standing between us as part of our union. 2 weeks later, Francine was arrested when police executed search warrants based on Warren's documentation. They found detailed surveillance reports on multiple families, not just ours. She'd been stalking and harassing anyone she blamed for various misfortunes in her life, including Cordelia's college roommate, who she claimed had introduced her to Warren, and Warren's parents, who she believed had raised a murderer. The trial was hard on Dexter. Testifying against his own mother took a toll, but he never wavered. "My mother needs help," he told the court, "but more importantly, her victims need justice and protection." Francine was sentenced to psychiatric treatment at a state facility, with a restraining order that extends to our children and grandchildren. She sends letters sometimes, pages of rambling accusations mixed with moments of startling clarity where she admits she misses Dexter. He doesn't read them anymore, but I do. I'm watching for signs of genuine healing, though I may never see them. On our first anniversary, as we watched Penelope play with her new baby brother James in our backyard, Dexter said something that stays with me. "Warren saved us all. Even knowing he was dying, he spent his last days making sure you'd be protected. That's real love." "He knew you'd come," I replied, touching the locket with Warren's picture that I still wear. In his letter to his attorney, he wrote that he'd seen us together at a school function, just in passing. He said you looked at me the way he used to, and he knew you'd take care of us. Penelope, now 11, recently asked me if I ever think about what would have happened if Grandma Francine hadn't stood up at the wedding. We would have lived with secrets. I told her honestly. Sometimes the worst moments reveal the most important truths. Warren knew that. That's why he prepared that letter. She nodded thoughtfully. He was really smart, wasn't he? My first daddy? Brilliant, Dexter said, joining us on the porch. And brave, just like you. If you've made it this far in our story, you probably understand that family isn't just about blood or marriage certificates. It's about the people who stand by you when the truth comes out, who choose you even when choosing you is hard. Warren chose to protect us even as he faced death. Dexter chose to stand against his own mother for the truth. And Penelope, at just 8 years old, chose courage over comfort. If this story resonated with you, if you've faced your own Francine or found love after loss, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Like this video if it touched your heart, and share it with someone who needs. To remember that the truth, no matter how painful, is always better than a beautiful lie. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that remind us all that even in our darkest moments, love finds a way to protect us. Remember, the greatest love stories aren't just about the people who stay, but also about those who prepare the way for happiness even after they're gone. Warren taught us that. Francine, in her twisted way, taught us that too. And every day we choose to honor the first lesson while learning from the second.